Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special Deck Tech. My name is Bryce Platts from the AGE Pro Team. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Alexander Vore, also from the AGE Pro Team, who just is coming off of a really big win at Battle Hardened Amsterdam, where the format was Living Legend, but that didn't stop him from bringing a CC-ready deck. Alex, how does it feel coming off that win at Battle Hardened Amsterdam?
About time after many battle hardened top eights. About time.
Now, Alex, I have a very important question. You're known in many circles as the better Vore brother. Ironically enough, in those same circles, you're also known as the worst Vore brother. Where do you stand on this question?
Hearsay. Definitely the worst Vore brother, but you have to get him to show up. So better Vore brother by default.
That's true. You were the only one that actually showed up at Amsterdam, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we would have had a different result if Matt was able to run it back with Oldham.
I know in LL he could have done it. Maybe.
How was Amsterdam? Did you enjoy yourself?
Oh yeah. It's always a great experience to kind of get out and travel. You know, I feel like without the excuse of flesh and blood, it's not something I would do. So, Barcelona for Worlds was my first experience in Europe, and then Amsterdam the second. But I had a real great time, and it's always fun to meet the team, the broader Fab community, just kind of explore the local area and get to take it all in. So I feel really grateful for that.
Yeah. Besides Fab, you've been in card games for a while now, right? Have you ever traveled quite as consistently as you have for Flesh and Blood?
No, my experience in card games is actually more digital than physical. I've actually never played a physical card game outside of Fab. You know, it's one of my digital friends that got me into it way back when at this point. But, I think Fab, the game itself is so powerful that I was able to kind of overcome that initial hurdle to getting into paper card games. And I got to admit, it's opened a lot of really amazing doors for me. So I'm grateful for that.
Nevertheless, you're staying frugal and you are pretty much only willing to buy around 82 cards, I would say. Is that about right?
More so the space, I don't have the space or the energy to bring a ton of decks to these tournaments. I'm not like Chris where I don't know what I'm playing and I've got 5 decks in my bag the day of the tournament. But yeah, I did only have the 80, 82, 83 cards on me.
We'll talk about those 82 cards in just a second, but I want to talk about something that you got up to in Amsterdam real quick. I keep hearing, I wasn't there myself, so I can't confirm, but I keep hearing rumor that there was an AGE Pro Team 22-mile bike ride. Is that something that's ringing a bell?
This is true. After Guy whooped my behind in the last round of the PT, he gave me the great recommendation of, hey, I know our game was 60 seconds, but you could take this bike ride up north to North Holland. And it was really great. I went with my fiance, you guys would like it. And I was like, Gee, this is perfect. We needed something to do on Monday. I'll pass your advice on. And that's what I did. And the boys partaked on this trip. And my conclusion at the end of it is that Guy and his fiance must be very in shape because it was an adventure, that's for sure.
That's awesome. What a great bonding experience. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about all the guys on this team besides their role in Flesh and Blood, but I would have expected that 22-mile bike ride would have been out of the question for a lot of them.
See, I was told it was only an hour. I was like, an hour bike? I could do that. I haven't ridden a bike in a decade probably, but, that's a thing that they do over there. So I was like, okay, that'll be cool. An hour, I can do that. But let's just say it took longer than 2 hours round trip. Maybe much longer, but.
Well, that's awesome, man. It's always nice to hear about all the boys getting out and having a lot of fun in ways besides this hobby that's brought us all together. So that warmed my heart, and I wanted to share that with everybody at home. Let's talk about this 82 cards that you brought to Amsterdam. Let's start with this one, Kano Drakaya of Aether. This is a hero that is not Living Legend as of yet. We're close, and I'm sure it'll happen sooner than we think. But as of yet, he is not a Living Legend hero, And therefore, I'm reminded of the metaphor bringing a knife to a gunfight. Do you feel like that was the case for you in this tournament?
I think my thoughts prior to the tournament were, do I really want to play this? There's Team Commoner at noon. I think I still held that sentiment during the tournament. And I'll be honest, I'm not an expert of the LL format, but I don't think even after winning that I would say Kano is an amazing deck for the format, but it's okay, like if you run good enough, you can definitely get there and get it done.
And run good enough you did. And despite not being an expert of the LL format, I think anybody that knows you can agree that you are an expert at this deck. So if anybody's going to take it from zero to hero in a format where it shouldn't belong by all rights and purposes, I think it was going to be you. So honestly, I think I speak for myself and a lot of the guys on the team when I say we weren't surprised by this result at all. For those of us that don't have six hardcore Kano players in their regular meta, what's the overall objective of this deck? What the heck does this deck do?
Particularly in LL, your deck is probably skewed towards being an aggro deck that kind of hits on a different axis. Most of the time when Kano is racing you, he's usually killing you in response to you killing him. So you kind of cheat an extra turn of the game in exchange for having no armor and 10 less life. So in the LL format, where a lot of the decks are really fast, you look at the stubby ninja decks, the chain decks, Starvo, things like that. Um, you're kind of playing a similar strategy, but being able to play on both turns kind of opens you up to some more creative ways to end the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And contrary to like the Icelander game plan with John Zapata, who also placed top 8 at this tournament, Kano kind of does that whole extra turn, other axis thing even better. Namely, because of his hero ability and because of this little piece of equipment. I know we all know this, but talk to me about how freaking powerful these boots are.
Extremely powerful, especially in Kano. One of the main differences between what Kano's traditionally trying to do versus, say, Icelander is to really assemble multiple cards together to kind of get to that phase where you're getting exponential damage. Icelander is trying to more so be really efficient, generate the maximum amount of points from, every given turn cycle. And then they have the extra reach to go to, um, maybe like 14 to 17 damage in response on the kill turn, right? Whereas Kano can very easily do 40 damage if you don't block anything, right? With his swing back, just because of how the cards scale, with Wildfire, Aether Flare, and then obviously Blazing Aether kind of doubling up whatever you've done for the turn.
Alex, this is a strategy you know very well. I called you an expert in this deck, and I don't think that's a reach. Tell me a little bit before we go any further. Tell me a little bit about your history with this list. I'm assuming it starts somewhere around PT1, but maybe it's a little bit before that.
Well, Kano in general, I've been playing for a very long time, and it's definitely adapted a lot over periods of time. Where when I first started playing this deck, Wildfire wasn't even a printed card, if you can believe that. So
You're the
changed a
fab
lot.
equivalent of a grandpa.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't really practice the LL format. I don't do any of that. But what's funny is I have played this deck into all the heroes in the LL format, so it's not like I don't have experience from back in the day playing those matchups, and I don't think it's changed significantly. But yeah, the deck has kind of evolved a little bit. I think it, where it sits at now is relatively standard. I think depending on the player, you get a few flavor picks in terms of, how much do you want to stack some matchups versus other sideboard cards you can include. In the LL format, with the restriction on warmongers, right? The only sideboard cards you probably really need to consider are like Scour, Warmonger for Chain, and then probably Poppers for Prism would be my guess. I generally wouldn't think that you're stacking matchups in the LL format, but we might touch base on that, I guess, later when we go through the run.
Well, nevertheless, since you mentioned it, let's talk about the stacking aspect of Kano. First of all, just can you give me a quick overview of what the game plan is when you decide to stack?
So generally, when you're deciding to stack, and what we mean when we say stack is pitch a sequence of cards in a specific order, so that when you reach that stage of the game on your second cycle, once you've gone through, your first 60 cards, you know the exact order of cards, and you can order them in such a way that you, in theory, always kill your opponent. Um, Now, it's pretty powerful if done correctly because, in theory, if you tell somebody, hey, survive 10 to 12 turns, probably is the average, you win the game every time, they'd say, oh, that's pretty cool. Now, there's some more nuance to it than just that, but it can be very powerful in matchups that aren't able to apply enough pressure to you. Or find some kind of way to stop you from enacting that game plan, which is probably less prevalent in the LL format, where a lot of the decks are probably trying to kill you on turn 1 or 2, especially when you have 30 health and no armor. But it does have some application, I think, to the CC format where things are not quite as fast.
Yeah, absolutely. So, nevertheless, you included the pretty typical package that we see for a pitch stacking Kano, namely the defense reactions. I think your nourishing emptiness is usually a game plan, whether or not you're stacking, right?
Yeah, I think it's personal preference if you want
Yeah.
to play the nourishing or not. It's a brick, but obviously, as Kano gets additional cards or additional resources, it kind of builds towards that game plan of wanting to do exponential damage. And that
Mm-hmm.
one extra card could be what tips it over the top. So being able to draw a 5-card hand and also have an arsenal for 6 cards as Kano, that's pretty good.
Yeah, and so despite the fact that the LL format is a little bit faster, you have this pitch stacking plan. Did you ever get to enact it during this tournament or no?
I did choose to do it in one of my 10 games I played, I think, against Oldhim, because I figured, well, Oldhim can't kill me, and I don't know if he has Oasis or how much AB or whatnot, so I'll just stack him. Surprisingly closer than you would think, but other than that, no, these cards kind of collected dust in the sideboard for the rest of the tournament.
So you say you brought 82 cards, but really you probably brought somewhere around like 76, which I respect even more.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a couple of different things I want to talk about here. We don't want to spend too much time on the deck because by and large, this is going to be something that's pretty familiar to people. So let's talk about the one thing that I think was an upgrade that you got to bring into this Living Legend format and these Living Legend heroes that you never did when they were in CC. Let's talk about Kindle. How is this card operating in the Living Legend format? Is it an edge?
I think you definitely want it in the Living Legend format. Most of my aggro games were 2 turns. I think all my ninja games were 2 turns. All my illusions game was not even 2 turns. Most of the, I didn't play against any of the Sash Berserk decks out there. I think most of them were KO, but might have been a couple Reinars. But in a format where you're dying in 1 to 2 turns as Kano, this card introduces the variants that you need to actually also be able to kill them in 1 to 2 turns, I think. So definitely something that, I think without this card, the deck might be too slow to actually compete with the Stubby Ninjas or the Sash Berserk Brutes or any of the other aggressive kind of variants that might exist in the LL format.
Absolutely. And so you would say this is a card that basically enabled you to win those games in 2 turns, or sometimes even less.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, it's also one of those things where, we were talking about this exponential damage concept, the extra 1 damage you get from the card, which it replaces itself in theory is how you're doing it. Whether that's buffing like a wildfire, an aether flare, or even just like a spindle or something like that, that 1 damage isn't actually 1 damage by the time you get to the end of the turn, right? And so if you're able to kind of ramp up multiple of those pumps or cycle cards in a way where you're exceeding traditional damage thresholds, that does make you more competitive and consistent and potentially achieving those faster lethals that you need to kind of race those other decks.
Absolutely. I noticed you also have the Waning Moon in the sideboard. I assume that's the sideboard weapon. Is this mainly for Wizard Mirrors, or I mean, I know there's like a lot of instances where you can target CC decks with it. I know you were toying around with it in the Azalea match for a little while. Did you ever get a chance to bring it in for the Living Legend tournament?
I did. I did play one Icelander, which is probably the matchup that you usually have this in the list for. I've had some opinions, let's say, on when I think this card might be good. I think the other obvious one that most people would agree that you would want Waning Moon is if you're playing against the new Prism, the one with 32 health that tutors the Figments, just because usually they don't have slash can't really run AB3. So you being able to throw this at them can break those Figments, which are very annoying, and you definitely do not want up. Um, Not that I expect to see a lot of Dromai in the LL format, but if you do, and it's traditional red line, which I would expect it would be, I also kind of like this in that matchup and always kind of did, just because they can't really block you. It can negate sand covers, which ruin your combos. Um, but other than that, it doesn't see too much play, I don't think, generally.
And since we're talking about Dromai, pretty much everywhere you go, there's going to be one in the format in the form of our friend and colleague Zachary Wallach, who basically refuses to play any other deck when he has the opportunity. So probably good that you're well prepared.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess the one last thing that I kind of noticed that can be a bit of a flex point in these Kano lists is the number of potions of deja vu you run. You've only got the one of. I know, like some of our local Kanos, like I'm pretty sure Ryan Brown, but I know for sure Eugene Galipchik tend to flex in more copies of this card. How do you kind of justify it in the list and the one of slot?
Um, I came to the conclusion of one just through deck building with sideboarding for CC, which is what this list is based on. It's pretty close to what I was playing in CC, maybe minus a couple cards I tweaked based on what I had. Um, Basically, in order to fit all the different pieces you need for various game plans and whatnot, your blues have to be interchangeable depending on the style of strategy you're enacting. And you can kind of see that a little bit even in the LL format with the three scours and Warmonger, right? If you want to call it like five-ish sideboard blues or whatnot, you have to be able to plug those into certain matchups. And it just didn't make sense for the matchups where I wanted it and the overall metagame of how I wanted to sideboard 60 in each individual matchup to have more than one copy. I think the card's fine. I think depending on what type of Kano you're trying to play, more than one can be, good. I mean, I'm never unhappy to have a Deja Vu in play. It's a very powerful card, but just within the deck constraints of only being able to register 80 cards, I've found myself preferring to only have the single copy.
Makes sense. I mean, I assume it does because you have a lot of reps on Kano and I don't. So we keep saying that you brought 82 cards. We all know that deck registration is only 80 cards. Are those two remaining cards just to fill the spot of the two Warmonger's Diplomacies that should be in that slot?
So the cards that I took out of my CC list, so this deck is two cards different than what I played at the PT, which was also Kano. Is the second Warmongers, which is because it's banned in LL. Kind of funny that the CC deck I played is actually not legal in LL, even though the nuance of it. If it was legal, I would have played it because who doesn't like to ruin Chain's day? And then the other card was Balance of Justice, which I had situationally in for some matchups in CC. I don't think that you can use that effectively in any of the matchups in LL. So I decided, hey, this is probably better as something else. So I borrowed that nourishing from Zach, actually, because I figured, okay, I want poppers. Nobody's going to have like wounded bulls or other things, which, if I rebuilt this list perfectly for LL, I'd probably cut the D-React package and play more poppers for Prism. So like wounded bulls, Bastion, some of those sevens to get around the negatives. So but this is what I was working with. So I added the nourishing. And then one of the cards I did have in the 82 was the third scour, which I wasn't totally sure how many copies I wanted to play. I ended up settling on 2 for CC. But for LL, I figured Chain's a good deck. They just nerfed Warmongers. They nerfed Starvo. Decent chance that you might see a lot of Chain. Scouring Soul Shackles is nice. So third copy of that. It's kind of interchangeable with Warmongers in some aspects, in terms of stopping the shackle. Probably not quite as powerful since you can't turn off Duskblade, but it's not bad. It's not bad.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've gone over it a million times. This is a CC deck that you brought to a Living Legend tournament. Let's take a look at your matchup history, specifically at the tournament. We're currently looking at your Swiss record. I want to pose a question to you, Alex, because if we continue with the metaphor of bringing a knife to a gunfight, and if that is in fact what happened in your case, did Gem play a role for you? Like, did you kind of get favorable matchups throughout the day, or were there any massive hurdles for you to jump over?
I definitely was not unhappy with my Swiss pairings. I think that a lot of your matchups are borderline 50-50. What you really don't want to see is Prism, either of them, since I guess you could play either in the LL format. Um, and given the representation at the Pro Tour on the previous day with the very high representation of Illusionist and particularly Prism, I figured that there was probably a good chance there was going to be a lot of Prism at the LL tournament as well, which I don't think she was up there. I don't think she was in the top 3, but she was up there in representation. So really just looking to dodge that, since you could really only take one loss, I think, or maybe if you lost the last 2, you could lose the last 2 and make top 8 here. But if you queue into Prism, you're almost losing probably 8 out of 10 times. So then you have to win all your other games and also not find another Prism. So that's the big hurdle. No Prisms, so not unhappy with that. But these
And
matchups are not necessarily the freest either.
incidentally, your one loss throughout the entire tournament was again in a matchup that generally is pretty good for you. Zen. Can you first talk about why Zen is generally a good matchup for Kano, and then kind of tell us what happened in that round 2?
So I think to answer your question, we have to kind of start the discussion in CC. How is the CC Kano v Zen matchup? And usually I'm of the mindset that it is Kano favorite. I don't think it's significantly Kano favored, but I would much rather be playing the Kano than the Zen in that matchup. Whether it's 55-45 or 60-40, something along those lines. It's slightly Kano favored, and I like being able to stop them from using their traverse effectively. Uh, in LL, things change a little bit because the bonds restriction is no longer true, which makes links much more powerful, so they don't feel as bad. Most Zens are probably trimming links in favor of either Spell Void or just something else altogether in CC, whereas in LL, I think every Zen presented links into me, which makes sense. They're playing bonds. They can tutor the bonds. It gives them more targets to actually start their chains with. They also in CC have the addition of stubbies, or sorry, in LL they have the addition of stubbies. What this does for the matchup is it probably means the Zen is killing you faster on average. Maybe if you think a CC game might go 3 turn cycles, a LL game could go 1 or 2. Just because they're presenting so much damage so quickly with that density of just the change to the deck because of the unrestriction of those cards, allowing links to shine, and then obviously being able to include stubbies, where you're not going to get Shuko value against Kano anywhere near what you're going to get stubbies value with. So I actually think the matchup is worse in LL, funny enough. It's still probably borderline 50-50 though. I went 2-1 against Zen, call it 55-45, I don't know. But all the games are really close. It's probably one of those matchups, like a lot of these other ones, I would lump into, it's 50-50. It could go either way, depending on how explosive their start is, what your hand looks like when you have to kill them, because you don't get a lot of leeway in LL. If you're playing these aggro games that are 2 turns, it's like you have to win now or you won't get a better chance, right? And if your hand sucks or the run out on the cards you roll or swap into is bad, you'll just lose those games, and that's just kind of how it works.
Yeah, when you're playing a combo deck, you're always more comfortable when you have an opportunity to set up key pieces in arsenal and eliminate as much variance as possible. That being said, like you mentioned, sometimes you're just under too much pressure. Did especially in some of these quicker matchups, did you ever find yourself in a situation where you kind of had to lean into variance and hope?
I think the only one where I really lent into variance and said, like, I don't know how it works, but I'll go for it was the semis game, which we'll probably get to later.
Yeah.
In most of the other spots, I think I was fortunate enough to either have enough time to find a comfortable spot, or I had the right hand with the right arsenal in the right situation. So I was fortunate enough to not really have too many subpar spots where I had to go for it. When it was the right time, it was usually like, okay, I'm good with this. Let's see how it runs out.
Yeah, absolutely. Since we're on the subject of Swiss still, and you mentioned top 8, I want to move there in just a moment. Before we do, are there any of these matchups that are ringing a bell that had like any specific pivotal moments that you wanted to shout out?
So I guess one thing that people might be curious about is what level of Kano hate, I guess, if you want to call that, did I run into throughout the tournament?
Because typically we would expect nobody to become prepared for it, right? And that's when Kano is most comfortable.
To some extent. I mean, I think most people probably wouldn't expect a lot of Kano and LL, which is probably a fair assumption. But Icelander, I think you could probably expect a lot more of. So it's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't expect to run into Oasis in LL from any of the heroes that are on the screen, at least. But all of the Starvos I played against had Shock Charmers. I think one was AB1, one was AB3. I played against an AB3 Zen. I think it was AB1 The Wizard Mirrors are usually 4 with the Constellus, so no different there. And then Chain is interesting because they kind of get 3 AB for free. And then the question is, how much Spell Void do they have? I think the one I played against was just Spell Void 2 with AB3. So nothing insanely against Kano, which, kind of makes sense. I think for tournaments like this, a lot of people are just like, they're like me and they're registering their CC deck, or they're taking a deck off the shelf from the past and registering it. So a lot of these decks are probably pretty similar to what was seen in the past for a lot of these matchups. So nothing crazy. I think one thing, I think the chain matchup is probably one you don't want to see, funny enough, just because of even if it's just AB3, Spell Void 2, the deck is so aggressive that your 50-50 in that matchup, or maybe even 45-55, is going to be really dependent on what they hit for the shackles. And I definitely got flashbacks to the old days playing my chain matchup, because in his 6 shackle banishes, it was like Art of War, Shadow Puppetry, Art of War, like all the cards. Those people who played Chain back in the day know, they're like, you're not supposed to banish those. You're supposed to draw them. But when Chain misses his shackles, it gives you a lot more room, which is nice. But if they hit their shackles, good luck. Good luck.
And some would say the same for Kano banishing blues and drawing reds. So,
Yeah, of course, of course.
cuts both ways.
Yeah,
Um,
it does.
Cool. So that's your Swiss record. Let's move on to the top 8 bracket. In quarters, you saw an Oldham. In semis, you saw that new Prism that you said was the least favorable possible matchup for you in this spread. We'll talk about that in a second, after we make a quick mention of yet another Zen for you. I think the third of the day. Let me see. Yeah, third of the day. Fourth Ninja. which took you to the title. So let's hone in on the question that everybody has. How the heck did you take down that Prism? Because that is definitely not a Kano favored matchup.
No. Before we touch base on that, it's funny because most people, it cuts both ways in the idea that you play Kano into Prism and the thought process is you can never win, which is not entirely true. It's not great. You don't want to play it. There are worlds you can win with kind of the top percentile of hands. It also, I think, a lot of people, their perspective on bad matchups into Kano are I can never win type things, and decks that maybe come to mind for this are like Oldham or maybe like some of the Assassins or Warriors or things like that. Um, it's funny because in a lot of the more recent tournaments, my opinion on that has been, some of these matchups aren't like that comfy. You know, they're supposed to be free, but they're not that comfy. The Oldham matchup was actually surprisingly close, just because he was hitting me with a lot of like Glacial Footsteps fused. You know, he had Macho Grandes, things like that. So it, a lot of people gloss it over and they're like, oh, Oldham, how did he get there? That seems really good for Kano, which I'm not complaining. I'd rather play against Oldham than Prism, that's for sure. But not the freest matchup. I did get equity from those D-reacts in that matchup, even though that's not really what my intent was. But I guess moving into the Prism matchup, which is probably how do you do that?
First of all, who were you sitting across the table from, and how did that whole interaction go?
Of course, teammate Austin Somers, the top 8 nationals guy, the Prism extraordinaire. He loves the illusionist class. He's played it for a long time, so of course we queue, and I'm like, Payne, why'd you do this to me? I need this PTI because I scrubbed out of the PT. And he's like, tough luck, I'm gonna destroy you. And I'm like, well, that's not great. So I believe I went first in this matchup, and my opener was, the typical opener against Prism is pray no Genesis. Like, please do not open Genesis, because you really don't want to see that, especially going first, where they can kind of cast it for free and redraw. So my starting hand, I don't remember exactly, but I action phased a Deja Vu and then arsenaled, I believe, a Kindle, some kind of combo piece. And I pass. I say pass priority, when you move to end and you look at them, you're like, do you have it? Are you him? And he wasn't him. So we went to draw up. I was like, step 1 complete. So we redraw though, and our hand was not the strongest. So we have the Kindle and Arsenal, and then we redrew Kindle, Cindering, red Aether Quickening, and red Tome of Aetherwind. So 5 reds, not really what you want to see, but Kindles can do some shenanigans. So his first game action is to pitch Light of Soul for a Yellow Herald. It wasn't erudition, so he's not total luck sack, but he pitches the Light of Soul, which creates the trigger, right? And it's at this stage where I'm like, okay, I should think. Even though my hand is not really what you want, if I let the Light of Soul trigger resolve, he's probably got like a 60% chance of hitting a Yellow Herald, in which case he gets to tutor his Figments and do things. And it's like, I don't really want to deal with that. The matchup's pretty bad. Juggling the ward and stuff is generally not what you want to do. So I figured, okay, let's play the Cindering since it's free and just see if there's anything to work with type vibes. And the op 3 was like 2 blues and a red flare. And I was like, well, it's not the best. It's not the worst. I have 2 blues to draw with the Kindles, right? And I have a flare I can hit, which is fine. You'd probably rather have Wildfire, but flare's a close second. So it's like, okay, I'll just send it. That's the mindset I really had this entire tournament since, I wasn't even sure if I wanted to play it. I didn't know how strong the deck was. I was like, if I get the opportunity, I'm just going to send it and see what happens. So, I set up some sequence where it was like, pitch the red Aether Quickening because we're never using it for Striders. put the Tome of Aetherwind on the stack, order the Kindles with the Ragamuffins. So, I'll have 4 cards in hand when the Tome resolves for the Rag, and then I know I'm drawing the 2 blues from the Kindles, using one of them to banish the Flare. And then the run out was just good. Like our random draws and Rag swaps, we ended up in like a situation where we had 3 cards in banish. It was the Red Flare, a Blazing, a Lesson in Lava, and it's the question of what to do with the pitch that I have left, because I could Kano one more card. And so the question was, should I just send it, or should I peel the card and then evaluate, or send it and do something? And I end up taking the card first, and it's another Tome, which is amazing. It's kind of exactly what you want to see.
I want to hit on that decision point one more time real quick, because the difference, the decision trees you had were either random Kano banish, right? In which case you hit the Tome, and that was great. But your other option was to save those resources probably for like Metacarpus and Crucible, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
I think I don't remember the exact line, but it was either Kano or Resolve. I think the other Tome might have still been on the stacker. There was some Tome shenanigans that did happen on this turn, but usually the mindset I always try to give myself, and it's decisions that usually do come up on these turns, is like, okay, I don't have perfect information. I don't know what's on top of my deck, but given the texture of what the turn cycle is going to look like, I know I need another card. But you might have cards that you can play or resolve that are going to draw cards. So you're like, well, should I draw cards first? Should I banish cards? How should you go through that decision tree? And typically, my analysis in situations like that is to take the highest statistical probability. And what I mean by that is, you generally want to draw blues and banish non-blues generally. And so I usually throughout my games of playing Kano will track the ratio of what's still in my deck in terms of what cards have I resolved to the graveyard, what cards have I pitched, without shuffling, what cards are in play /hand/arsenal, to determine what the likelihood is of the next card being blue or non-blue. And in those spots where you have decisions that impact each other, I will usually go with the decision of it's slightly more likely it's blue, I'll draw cards here. It's slightly more likely it's red, I'll banish the card here. In any given game, that might not actually be true, of course, but statistically in the long run, I think it's probably the correct way you should be playing Kano, to just say, say it's 58%, it's a blue, you're gaining that extra 8% equity over a true 50-50, right? Over, some number of games, you'll win more times than you don't, which is nice. But I ended up doing the math. I was plus red, so I was like, okay, I'll see what the card is. And it was Red Tome, which I was like, all right, nice to be rewarded. You like to see that.
Absolutely.
And then it basically ran out to the point where the lethal line I presented was, Blazing on the stack to play around him, breaking Halo to Judgment it, right? And then Flare for 6, threatened with 2 amp. And he has the decision here at this point of how he wants to block, if he wants to break his Halo, try to threaten the Lesson, which is still in banish.
And he has 2 cards in hand still, right?
2 cards, none floating, because the Herald was 2 costs, and he pitched Light of Soul, and he's still got that trigger on the stack for if he's not dead, right? And the 2 cards in his hand actually ended up being 2 blue auras, so he couldn't break the helmet.
Yeah.
Not that I knew that, of course. So I played like he could. But he also did have max pitch, which was nice. He was on AB2 with the Spell Void too. And he ended up, I think, talking himself out of breaking Spell Void on the Flare, which is probably a slight misplay. But had he have broken it, he would have lived on 4, and I would have been on 24. So
with a full grip coming back your way, right?
So I probably would have still gotten there, but with the exact way he blocked, he did end up taking 32 damage with the block 6 and breaking Halo later. With I think the line I went for was like Flare Lesson, Blazing with Waning Moon before the Blazing. So pretty good, pretty good.
Pretty good.
Only possible with some shenanigans. I had the deja vu from the first turn, right? So I think I ended up playing like 2 or 3 tomes. So I was able to use Gaze multiple times, put it on top of deck, use it some more, guarantee draw blues in spots. So definitely a top, 95th percentile hand, but that's what you need to beat Prism. It just happened to work out, which was nice.
Sometimes Gem is a cruel mistress, and there are a lot of rivalries within the AGE Pro team. I always see Zachary Wallach round 3. Austin seems to always crumble to you, and I think it's these relationships that make our team such a rich community and environment. So very proud of you guys to be seeing each other in the semifinals. Very proud also of John Zapata. For making top 8 as well. It was nice to see all those AGE Pro Team shirts in that picture.
Chris bubbling as he
Yeah.
usually does, losing to Austin actually, but yeah, tough
Unlucky.
for him.
That's
Tough for
life.
him.
That's life
Get
in the
better.
AGE Pro Team. You lose your teammates a heck of a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Anything else you want to mention about this top 8 bracket? I think that Prism matchup is definitely the most exciting.
Yeah, no, I mean the Zen game was pretty traditional. It was pretty spicy too. Because he like lived on 4, and then we did this kind of like back and forth dance a little bit, and I ended up blocking him in a way where I was like, okay, if I go to my turn, I win. And so he's like, okay, I'll tap out to present lethal, and I still had 2 cards, right? So it's like blue Kindle, and same thing. Do the math. Is it more likely to be red blue? I did it in a way where I was able to deal 4 damage through AB0 with the Kindle and the blue. So that was nice. But yeah, I mean the deck worked, ran pretty good, so no complaints there. If anybody wanted to play Kano in future LL tournaments, I'm not sure I would recommend it. But if you did want to do it, I would probably swap those 7 defensive cards for some combination of attack action cards, which you would get a lot more value against the illusionists and wizard mirrors, probably with wounded bulls, probably bastion or fighting spirit, something like that. Some combination of those cards. You can play 7 of them, and you do it when you're not doing the traditional 60 in the aggro races, right? And that'll probably give you more equity than I had into the Prism matchups, and even the wizard mirrors. It's probably not horrible to play. So
Absolutely. So knowing what you know now, would you take Kano to another LL tournament?
Well, the LO tournaments, as they've existed so far, have kind of been like the tier 2, tier 3 side pieces of whatever the main event is. And so I usually only bring a single deck to a tournament. And if that deck is Kano, then that leaves me stuck playing Kano at the LL. Now, I do know LSS, I think, announced a LL calling. So it will be the first time the LL tournament is the primary focus of the weekend. In that case, I might play other options. Like I said, I don't think Kano's amazing in the LL format, but of course the deck is powerful. It does powerful things, and it can definitely work when the cards line up your way.
Well, you've definitely put your share of time into it and gotten a lot of equity out of it. I think anybody that is interested in being a wizard main or even flirting with the idea, Alex is a person to watch, and that's why we got him on here today to share a little bit of the special sauce. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you out there, thank you for watching. Thank you all so much from all of us here at Arcane Games and Events. Your viewership fuels what we do here. On the YouTube channel, as well as all throughout the year at the Arcane Games and Events Open Series, which, by the way, continues next month, August 24th and 25th. We are hosting Battle Hardened San Diego. And then the following day, the Sunday, August 24th and 25th, will be the final iteration of the AGE Open Series, where players qualify or don't qualify for the illustrious Players Championship. So we hope to see you there. Alex, are we going to see you there?
I will be at the Battle Hardened. I will not be at the Age tournament because I'm not live for the championship this year, unfortunately. I just couldn't make enough of them. But I'm rooting for all those people on and near the bubble because, the Age championship is definitely a great event to watch, and a lot of talented people playing in it for sure. So excited to see how that shapes up.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to seeing you in San Diego, Alex. All our viewers, please like and subscribe the YouTube channel. That's what kind of fuels us and keeps us going. So thank you again for watching. Thank you, Alex, and we'll see you next time.